Dzień dobry. Wie geht es Ihnen heute? Buongiorno. Buenos dias. Hola. See, lots of responses. That's good. Usually when a missionary comes, they talk funny. I don't have too bad of an accent, do I? That's because I come from Milwaukee. I come, though, to tell you about our missions, and I'm going to kind of focus in a little bit about Zambia, if that's okay with you. We have many missions all over the place. But I want to just take a look at the gospel first. The gospel, we see, it's an interesting gospel, and many of the gospel writers have the same story. Mark has a very similar story, but the reaction of the disciples is very different. In his rendition of the gospel, first of all, remember last week we had that feeding of the multitudes, 5,000 people, and they didn't know how they could do it, and then finally Jesus says, well, why don't you give them something yourselves? And they said, we don't have much, and today we hear a little more of the fear of the disciples, because here they're crossing the sea and they're frightened. How often in the Gospels do we hear that phrase, don't be afraid? Way at the very beginning, when Jesus is born, we hear it already. He tells the angel tells the shepherds, don't be afraid. And I don't know how many times, I really should count that sometime, but so many times in the Gospels we hear that phrase, don't be afraid. Oftentimes when we're confronted with something different, and the disciples today are confronted with something different, and many of us, we're not used to being surprised like that. There's somebody walking across the water, and it's a ghost, and they were terrified. That's what the gospel tells us. And sometimes, we're frightened too. We are those disciples. We don't know what to do. When we're confronted with something difficult, we question, whether we can respond to it. We're so used to, not too many of us, are able to kind of roll with the punches, in the sense that, we don't produce our own food anymore. We leave that to the farmers, and we don't even prepare it sometimes. We get packaged stuff from the grocery store. So food and even clothing, I would say not too many people do a lot of creating of their own clothes anymore, right? But that's not true in foreign lands sometimes. The people that we deal with in the missions have to worry about some of those things. Where are they going to get their next meal from? And what are we going to use for clothing? But today, one of the things that I see in the gospel, especially in this contrast between Mark's gospel and Matthew's gospel, in Mark's gospel, the people, the disciples still don't understand. How come you don't understand what happened with the loaves? That's the phrase in Mark's gospel. Today, the disciples, they're frightened. Their fears are confronted. Peter is pulled out of the water. He gets scared too in the end, and ultimately Jesus has to pick him up. And but in the end, they acknowledge and they express their belief in the Lord. They do him homage, the gospel says. But in the end, they still don't quite understand, because you know, as the story goes on, they all leave him in the end. How about us? See, this is the question really for us. What are we going to do in our own lives? Are we going to stick with Jesus, or are we going to kind of get scared off and frightened and walk away? And Jesus sometimes has to ask the question, are you going to leave me too? We get scared when we're confronted with difficulties. If I tell you about mission is about being courageous enough to do what's needed, I think. I'm a Palatine. I don't know if you ever heard of them. Has nothing to do with Palatine, Illinois, by the way. One time I was helping out in a parish, and I said, I'm a Palatine, and they said, oh, we're from Palatine too. And I said, no, I'm not from Palatine, I am a Palatine. And the name comes from St. Vincent Pallotti. St. Vincent Pallotti was canonized by John the 23rd, who is now a saint, and himself. And he was canonized during the Second Vatican Council because he had the idea that somehow we're all part of the mission. We're all part of the process of bringing the good news to one another. That's really what mission is about. And we can't be afraid. Some,times we look at our littleness as the disciples did last week, and they said, we only have, a few loaves and a couple of fish. What are we going to do with that with so many people? And today, the disciples are frightened because of the storm. And many things come up in our lives. And sometimes we get scared because we know that we can't do it ourselves. The point is, we can't do it ourselves. We have to depend on the Lord. He's the one who's going to support and encourage us. But just to get back to this notion of it's our responsibility, St. Vincent Pallotti always used to say, we're all apostles. Because the word apostle means somebody sent out on a mission. That's really what it is in Greek. And then the mission is not impossible. We can do it. We can bring the good news to the people around us. I'll get to that in a minute. But for a minute, let's just talk about Zambia. Where's Zambia? The bishops want us to know something about, the rest of the church, which is bigger than right here in Crystal Lake. You know that. It's a big church. And anybody know where Zambia is? Africa, right? Okay. And just to locate it a little bit, I was just there in April. That's why I'm focusing in a little bit on that. I was there on Ash Wednesday, and we put ashes on everybody's heads, and I celebrated, and I preached at all the masses in English, by the way. They know English in Zambia. Many of the people do. Anyway, and what they do is they pour the holy water into the ashes, and you got mud. So I put mud on everybody's forehead. And that was a delightful experience again for me. I've been there a couple of times. But Zambia is kind of, if you look at the continent of Africa, it's fat up on top, it comes down to a point. And if you draw a line under the fat part and put a cross below it, you'll find Zambia where the crossbars of the cross are. It's in the middle of the southern part of Africa. So that locates it a little bit. And most of us with gray hair won't find it in our old geography books, by the way, because the names of the countries have changed and the borders have changed, so I'm not surprised that, sometimes we're still wondering where it is. But it's a country of about 11 million people. And we sometimes think of mission lands as very poor, and they are to some degree, but there are rich and poor in every country. There are rich and poor in this country. Only about 1% of the population has the wealth of 75% of the wealth of this country, so that gives you perspective right here. Zambia is rich in resources. It has copper mines. But in the outskirts of the city, that's where our parish is in Lusaka. It's, I don't know how many people are in the parish, but I'm going to guess that we have 3 churches, 2 of them about this size and 1 smaller one. It's in the outskirts, and that's where people live because they can grow some crops out there. And they can provide for their, corn is easily planted, and the land is fertile. And it's warm climate. But there is poverty there, and a lot of poverty. In the year 2005, for example, 98,000 people died of AIDS in Zambia alone. 98,000. We worry about the Ebola virus today and how it's going to spread. Well, that's what happened then. But they thought it was going to go away with the AIDS epidemic. It hasn't gone away. There are lots of good things happening. But when 98,000 people die in 1 year and they leave behind them orphans, that's what happened. In the prime of their life, their parents died. Grandparents take over, right? But you know what? Life expectancy in Zambia is only 35 to 45 years old. And I'm an old guy over there. And that's the truth, So we have a lot of young people in our parish that are literally orphans. They have no parents because they're gone. And so, sometimes if we don't take care of them, then they're going to be roaming around the streets begging, which they do. But, so just a practical thing, I forgot to tell you. Bad news is there's a second collection, right? You knew that. But what's it for? If we were to provide for tuition, books, clothes, shoes for our orphans, and I don't know how many there are, but there are a lot, that would cost about $200 for one child for 1 year. And that's cheap, right? You can't raise a kid today in our environment for that money. But our money goes farther over there. So that's one of the targets for our collection, really. Another one is, I should tell you, I was there a couple of years ago during Holy Week. It was a wonderful experience to pray and sing with them, because everybody sings, and it's, the roof rattles because we have 13 choirs in the parish. The roof rattles because it's tin. But the faith is alive and well there. But okay, I was going to say, on Wednesday of Holy Week when I was there, we had a funeral. And I asked the pastor, I said, well, what happened? I saw that gal here on Palm Sunday, and today, Wednesday, we're celebrating her funeral. And he said, well, we have a lot of funerals here. I don't know what happened. He said, but probably in the cemetery in which you will be buried, there will be 50 funerals today. So that was his answer to me. The reason for that is because we worry about health care. Their health care is non-existent, So if we could provide for a dispensary with drugs and things, we already have. I mean, we're in the process of doing all of that. But a healthcare worker, but we have to fund this thing and keep it supplied. So that's another target for our collection. A healthcare worker can help to teach the people how to take care of cuts and bruises. It's not just AIDS, but that is a problem. Children are born with HIV. So those drugs are crucial. But just the simple things that we go to the drugstore for are non-existent. A healthcare worker can teach people how to take care of cuts and bruises so they don't get infected. So that's the practical element that our guys are doing there. This is what they have to worry about. Besides, we have a wonderful catechetical program. We have 50 small Christian communities that gather together during the week and read the scriptures together and pray together. So those things are happening, and we have some catechists that are very good at organizing those groups, and we're trying to build a school. The tuition is important right now because we haven't built the school yet. So until we do that, then we'll have to worry about the staff and all of that. But we bought a brick-making machine. It will also serve as employment for people. We bought a farm. That also serves as a source of employment for people. So good things are happening. I want to say that. But we have to keep it going. And that's what that's about. But mission is not just about foreign lands. It's about us and how we sometimes shrink back from our own responsibilities of taking care of the people around us. We have to bring the gospel into the real world. It can't stay in the book. When we hear that the disciples went out and they were with Jesus and they were listening to him, ultimately Jesus sends them out 2 by 2. And he says, now you take over. And that's what mission is about. It's our bringing that good news of Jesus into our own environment. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples, practical examples. When I'm home, last night I went to visit one of our men who was in a nursing home in St. Camillus in Milwaukee. And I go to visit him pretty much every day, as often as I'm home and I can make it. But I know that a lot of people in nursing homes don't get visited. That's the reality. And it's not because we don't care about them. Sometimes we're a little bit afraid, When you go to visit, you don't have to preach, You just have to be with people sometimes. That's the most important thing. When I go there, I see, he has Alzheimer's, so do we pray? Sometimes. But more often than not, we just sit together and watch TV. And he sits in the community room, and I know all the people there, and they know me because I come there often. And I know them by name. He knows my name, but he doesn't know too many people by name anymore. You know how that is. You've heard the story 15 times, but you can listen to it again. I'm sure that there are nursing homes that you could go and visit and just lift people's spirits by coming and they recognize you, right? And when you go to the grocery store, another practical thing, when you see that the checker has had a rough day, do you lift their spirits? They wear a name tag usually. Just call them by name and just say good morning. The simple thing. But anytime I think we can bring joy into people's lives, that's part of the mission. God loves you. And his presence is here. That's what mission is about. That's what our missionaries do. They live with people, they work with people, they care about them, and the people know it because they're there. I do something strange, and I don't expect you to do this, but some years back when I was in parish, I was an associate, and I was working with the people on a parish picnic, and I said, well, we're doing a lot of things to raise some money for the parish, and that's really nice. But what about the little ones? Could we get somebody to blow up balloons and maybe a clown or something? And they said, well, we don't know any. So I became the clown. I still do it. So that was 30 years ago. And a couple of weeks back, I was doing at our parish picnic. Anytime we can bring a sense of well-being and life to one another, joy, that's what it's about. Another example. One day I was in a store, and a fellow reached into his pocket and he pulled this out. And he said, Father, give this to somebody. And I said, I'm going to take it with me, because, this is a simple, how do we bring the gospel into the world? How do people know that the Lord loves them? This says a lot just by the symbol that it is. When you hold it in your hands, when you're having a rough time, he cuts these out of scrap wood, and he sands them, and he gives them away. Simple thing. What's your way of bringing the gospel into the world? That's what mission is about. And we have a part to play in it, all of us. All of us. So it's not just about foreign lands, it's about us. And how do we bring that? One time I was in West Virginia, and somebody had nicely posted some signs over all the exits to the church. And it said, a simple paper sign that said, you are now entering mission territory. Perfect. I said, that's perfect. When we leave here, we have to bring the good news of Jesus into our world. That's what it's about. That's what it's about. I want to just leave you with one little thing. I greeted you in several languages. I don't know how many of you knew them, but it's okay. In Zambia, by the way, they would say Mauko Bwanje. Mauko Bwanje. But in India, they have a wonderful greeting. And I bet you have seen this on TV. I have seen it many times. And sometimes if you don't know what it is, you're wondering, Did you ever see anybody do this on TV? That's an Indian greeting. And it's a wonderful greeting. It's a simple folding of the hands, bow the head. If you do it slowly, it makes more sense, And the words that go along with it in Hindi are namaste, namaste. There are 56 languages in India, by the way. So you go to different parts and you'll find different languages. So it might turn out different. But what it means is this. It means I greet the God that lives within you. I greet the God that lives within you. I recognize God lives within you. And I bow to that. Isn't that what we believe? Especially as we gather for Eucharist. We take in that body of Christ. And he becomes part of us. Don't be afraid to take him with you as you leave and share him with the people that you meet. Namaste.